Alright, welcome back. Alright, so in this video, we're now going to go a little bit deeper into the theoretical framework that was set up last video for how psychic abilities work. We're going to go over the way your senses express themselves at the subconscious level in terms of the spirit, and we're going to go over basically clear type nomenclature, which is just a term in the psychic community to talk about psychic abilities. Right, so just as a short recap, basically in the last video, so we talked about how psychic abilities are actually the abilities that come from your spirit. So they represent your spirit's natural innate ability, which comes from God. Presumably you have them for all eternity, right, with your spirit. They represent your spirit's ability to sense reality, right? Normally your spirit's ability to sense things is turned off. We approximated it by saying it's turned off. Really, it's just highly toned down. And the vehicle your spirit has to sense things, we call it, generally referred to as your third eye. But your spirit has an ability to sense reality that's normally toned down, but your subconscious has an ability to sort of turn it back on, or charge in a way where it turns it back on or it activates it, right? So another way of saying that is to say your subconscious regulates that particular ability of your spirit. Right? We also said that your subconscious action through that basic framework has the ability to express itself in the form of sensing. Normally, it expresses itself in that form in a way that's only controlled by your body, and your mind can't control it. So yeah, that was basically the theoretical foundation that we set up last video. But now we're going to go a little bit deeper into it. So to go over this first point, the spirit is able to sense reality in two ways. One being voluntary and the other being involuntary. So basically what I'm getting at there is basically just to say that your spirit has the ability... Actually, no, let me go over this next point, right? Because I should have really combined these, but to go over this next point, it says voluntary sensing is associated with non-locality and involuntary sensing is associated with locality. So this is very important. These two ideas really tie together. And so basically, the first thing I want to go over is involuntary sensing. So involuntary sensing is pretty much the one that you know, right? So for example, if I'm in a room, right, I'll see everything going on in the room, and what's going on in the room and what I see in the room really has nothing to do with my beliefs or my ideas or what I want to see or what I don't want to see, right? So talking about the physical senses for the moment. So if something changes in the room, I'm going to see it, whether I expected that change or not, whether I wanted that change to happen or not, right? If someone forces me to watch a movie I really don't want to watch, right, I've got no choice but to see it and retrieve information about the movie, right? So that type of sensing is involuntary, right? I can't choose to do it or not. It's going to happen whether I want to or not, right? And so that's basically how your body senses things, right? So when I'm hearing something, I'm gonna pick up information about the object that's making the sound, whether I want to or not, as long as that information reaches my ears. So sensing in that sense can occur involuntarily. Now the important thing about involuntary sensing also is to understand that it is generally associated with locality. So what that means is that it is associated with a local sort of, it's associated with the local space around you, right? So in other words, your five senses, so your sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell, all of them rely on you interacting with the thing you're sensing in some way, right? So whatever you sense physically, you're always going to receive information in some physical manner from the thing that you're sensing or picking up information about. So if I'm looking at, let's say I'm seeing something on the horizon, right, then it's sending an electromagnetic wave to me, and that enters my eye, my retina, and then it sends a signal to my brain. So it had to interact with my physical body in some manner, right? If I hear a song, right, the song is sending information in the form of sound or sound waves, which is just a wave in gas. The wave transmitted through the gas or through the air, and that enters my ears, right? So the signal came in the form of sound and it interacted with my body through my ears. Same thing if I taste something, it has to interact with my tongue, the sensory, the taste buds on my tongue. If I smell something, so on and so forth, right? If I smell something, I'm smelling the chemicals in the air. But suffice it to say that involuntary sensing is generally associated with locality. Something has to interact with me that's near to me, right? I'm not able to sense something across the universe or even in the next room, right? Because I'm not able to interact with it, right? And so what it means is you cannot sense something involuntarily at a distance, right? In terms of your physical senses. So that's basically how your physical senses work. Now, your senses also have the ability to sense things voluntarily, right? Which means I can choose what I sense. Now, that is not something that your physical body has at all, right? So that might seem a little bit strange, but that is actually, your spirit actually has that ability, right? So let's say that you charge your subconscious in such a way that it reactivates your spirit's ability to sense reality. So like I said, your spirit's ability to sense reality is normally toned down, but if you, in your body, your spirit just uses your physical body's commands for the sensory expression of your subconscious, right? You got no control over it. Your physical body does all the work, right? But it is possible to discharge your subconscious and turn your spirit senses back on to their, like I said, I don't believe you can turn it on all the way while we're alive. I think it only turns on fully all the way when we die. Sometimes in near-death experiences, it also goes on to a much fuller form, but I still don't, based on what I've read, I still don't think it's at its full form, right? But you can charge it in such a way to kind of turn them back on to a degree. And when you turn your spirit senses back on to a degree, which we also normally just say opening your third eye, that's really what that's referring to. But when you turn your psychic abilities back on, then you can sense things at a distance, right? Without it interacting with them at all. So if something's in the next room, I can just use my spirit's ability to sense information about it. I can pick up sensory information such as what it looks like, what it sounds like, things like that. So that's basically what we generally mean by psychic ability. Now, the important thing to recognize is that your spirit also has the ability to sense things in an involuntary way as well. So sensing in general occurs voluntarily and involuntarily. It always occurs in those two forms. Just like I said, your spirit also has the ability to use involuntary sensing, right? So in a way that doesn't depend on what the body's doing. Now, when your spirit senses things involuntarily, that's also still based on locality, right? So it's based on locality in the spirit realm. So for example, when people astral project or when they have a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience in general, they're able to sense the local spirit realm that's around them, right? They're not seeing the spirit realm all across the universe all at once. I was going to say something, but no. For now, we'll just say no, they can't do that. What they're able to do is sense a local spirit realm, right? So if they astral project, they might sense this room in the spirit realm, right? So that would be associated with locality. And the other thing is the involuntary component of it, right? They're sensing the room in a way that really doesn't have much to do with their beliefs or their desires and things like that. That's what happens in near-death experiences, right? Just like our physical senses, we're going to sense things involuntarily, whether we want to or not, whether we care to sense these things or not, we're going to sense them. That same thing occurs in the spirit realm. There's a degree to which that occurs. Now, the spirit realm changes much more in response to your thoughts, so it's not exactly as clear-cut as it is for your physical senses and the physical realm, but there is still a degree of involuntary sensing there, right? So you're going to sense the local environment around you, whether you want to or not, right, to some degree. So there's even a version of sensing in your spirit that you can't control and has nothing to do with what you're wanting to sense or not. But then your spirit, like we already went over this, but your spirit has voluntary sensing, which that's based on what you choose, right? So I can choose to sense this, I could choose to sense that. And that's basically what psychic abilities are. Now, we're not going to talk about psychic abilities in the involuntary sense in this book, or really at all. I don't really go over that. I have a little bit of experience with it, but I don't really cover that. So, for example, if you turned on your if you turned on your psychic abilities for involuntary sensing, then you would be able to sense the local spirit realm around you. And some people have done this, right? Some people turn on their psychic abilities or turn on the third eye to that degree, and they're able to just see spirits sort of roaming around, right? And then they'll, as they go about their day, right, they'll just see a spirit associated with this person, a spirit associated with that person, right? So that's involuntary sensing associated with locality, right? I have done that only 2 times in my life. I know how to do it, but I'm not really interested in that. I don't really think anyone should be doing any of this, really, right? Unless you have permission from God, right? That's the only time you would ever use psychic abilities, is when you have permission from God. And some people are born with them, so they're pretty much always turned on, but that's with God's approval. Sometimes it's generational curse as well, and then it goes away as you draw nearer to God. So, but the only times that I did it was when I used my psychic abilities one time to see my aura. And it was kind of interesting because, like, I did it 2 times, and I saw a different color each time. But what I actually found out was I didn't know this at the time. So when I saw my aura the first time, I kind of want to say what color it was, but I don't know that I want to. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's an interesting color. And then I didn't know what it meant, right? So then I looked online and I saw these charts about what it means when your aura is this color. And it was 100% correct, right? When the color I saw matched exactly my mood, right? So usually the charts that say if your aura is this color, usually it means you're in this type of mood, or you're in this type of mental state, or whatever. And it was exactly correct. So the second time I did it, which this color I could say was blue, right? And it matched. I think when I read it online, it said something about you're in a more, I forgot what it was, a spiritually aware or awakened state or something like that. Which that was 100% the mood I was in at the time. So I just thought that was interesting. I don't know where that information comes from, how they know what the color of the aura means and things like that. But when I saw my aura, it matched those charts exactly. And I didn't know what it meant when I first saw the color. So those were the only 2 times I've done it. I've never done it in a way where I'm seeing deep into the spirit realm. I didn't charge it far enough, right? It also depends on how you're using it, what your intention is. We haven't really gone over that yet. But like I said, we're not going to cover that version of psychic abilities anyway. But like I said, some people have done it. And for those people who have done it, they look into the spirit realm and they see spirits all the time. They see spirits on other people. They see spirits in different rooms they walk in. And they just see spirit realm activity. The problem with that in general, though, is if you're doing it in a way not approved by God, then most likely you're just seeing nothing but demonic spirits. And you're also much more liable to be psychically possessed. So you're pretty much just seeing the things they want you to see. So it's involuntary in that sense as well. And they're going to likely appear to you. So we talked about it before. They're going to appear to you in a way that's more, seems like nicer and more welcoming, but they're basically engaging in the long con, right? They want to con you into thinking they're sort of nice and good spirits so that you can focus on sensing them more, and they have more control over your subconscious ability to sense things, right? Which is psychic possession. Now, people who have their psychic abilities turned on in that sense can also still see angels and good spirits and things like that. Now, I imagine that's probably rarer, right, for the people who don't have a strong relationship with God, because there's ways this works that we haven't really gone over yet. It has to do with things we're going to talk about in chapter 9 and 10. But suffice it to say, if you have a strong relationship with God, which generally would mean that if you have psychic abilities turned on in that way, it's only because God approved it, right? But you would be able to see angels through that relationship. So the types of things that you'll be able to see also has to do with what you're consenting to, right? So that'll make a little more sense based on what we talk about in chapter 9. But if you have a strong relationship with God, you're consenting to God's spirit to be in your life, which that brings along angels and things like that. And so some people can see angels and things like that. Sometimes children will be able to see angels, and I imagine they have a connection to God through God's grace. But yeah, people who aren't doing it through approval from God are almost always going to just see demonic spirits, right? When they turn their psychic abilities on in this way. And a lot of that reason comes from the fact that angels are not really, and again, this isn't really important now, but so we basically, before I get into that, we talked about how the spirit realm was bifurcated in terms of our connection to God, right? So God has the highest frequency, or you can use the term vibration. Some Christians are very uncomfortable with that term vibration. It's just a word, right? It's just a word you can use to describe the how close a person or reality is to God. That's all it means, right? God is the highest reality because it has the highest vibration, which means the highest expression of love and things like that, right? Everything else has a transcendental connection to God, and transcendental connection preserves volatility. So the more connected to God you are, so we talked about this with spiritual energy, but the more connected to God you are, the more spiritual energy you have, which means your subconscious is more and more volatile to positive frequencies, or you behave more in the likeness of Jesus Christ. So we basically went over that, but just going over it in terms of what you see in the spirit realm, angels have way higher frequency or vibration or volatility. They have a subconscious volatility or spiritual energy much closer to God, so way beyond ours. So we're not really going to see them in our local reality. We would see demonic entities, right? We're much closer to them, right? But so that's why you wouldn't normally see them in the spirit realm when you turn these abilities on. You're almost always going to see demonic entities. So that's something, like I said, a lot of people who've gotten into New Age and witchcraft and have turned on their psychic abilities, that happens to them all the time. They think that these spirits that they see are, a lot of times they'll think that they're called spirit guides. Sometimes they'll think of them as family members and things like that, but a lot of times it is negative entities, right? You will only be able to see the positive things, the angels and things like that, when you're doing this with approval from God and you have a strong relationship with God, which means you are in a state of repentance, right? Or it could just be your purpose in life and God is calling you, but God will still call you to repentance anyway, and things like that, right? So I kind of went on unnecessarily long, but suffice it to say that, I was just going to say we're not really going to cover involuntary sensing here. So when I talk about psychic abilities, you could talk about psychic abilities in terms of involuntary sensing and voluntary sensing from the spirit. When I talk about psychic abilities going forward, I'm just going to talk about voluntary sensing, right? Which was voluntary sensing basically means I'm using my subconscious to I'm charging my subconscious in a way that allows my spirit to sense things at a distance, right? So if something is, like I said, is held behind my back or is held behind someone's back and I want to sense it, then I would just charge my subconscious in a way that allows me to pick up information about it. I don't have to interact with it at all. It could be across the universe and I would still be able to sense it. But to do that, that would be a form of voluntary sensing. Now, to go forward, one interesting thing I notice about sensing in this way, which this isn't too important right now, this is just based on my experience. I feel like this borrows from your creativity, right? Which is interesting. Well, we're actually going to talk a little more about that later. But, and what I mean by that is when I'm charging my subconscious to sense things, it's like what I see in my mind, I can basically, what I see in my mind doesn't feel like I'm using creativity the way we normally would use the word. It feels like something else, right? So it feels like I'm sensing it. So we haven't really talked about that type of stuff yet, but we're going to go into that. But that's just something I wanted to mention early on, that it feels almost like I'm borrowing from my creativity when I'm using that. I feel less creative the more I charge my subconscious to voluntarily sense things, which is probably also why I felt so depressed when I did that. Overall, though, I lost a lot. I was losing spiritual energy when that was happening, which is why I felt so depressed. But to go over this point now, we're now going to talk about the type of intentions you would use to charge your subconscious to turn on your third eye or to use your psychic abilities. We're not going to go into great detail about it, but just to basically talk about your intentions. So we're going to talk about something that I call sense intentions. So sense intentions are intentions whose command component expresses sensing something. The subject of such an intention is called the target, right? So we talked about how your intentions are made up of two parts, right? So the subject part and the command part, right? The command is always directed toward the subject. We talked about how the commanded part of the intention can express itself in three different ways. So it can express itself in terms of desire, something the conscious mind wants. It can express itself in terms of concrete things. So it tells the subconscious to alter its perception to perceive something that can be represented by one of the five senses. So you can see touch, taste, smell, or hear something like in your mind, basically. And it can also express itself in terms of abstract things, which is basically like information, relationships, things like altering your perceptions, perceived information, relationships, and things like that. So what we didn't really go over is you could generally think of this as another. Technically, this would still fall kind of under the other ones, but for the moment, we could think of it as another type of command component, which is in the form of sensing something. So we haven't really talked about that yet. There's really no reason to go over it outside of the topic of psychic abilities, because that's the only time you're really using it. But that's another thing your intention can do. Your intention can express a command to sense something, which is very important. It is different from the command to create something. So let's say I want to visualize something. If my intention says visualize this, then I'm just creating. That's creativity. If my intention says to see something, then that's different. That's a sense intention. So we're going to go over that distinction a little bit more later. That distinction is very important in charging using your psychic abilities. But yeah, that's basically how it works. So you would use sense intentions. Now the subject of a sense intention is generally what's called in parapsychology a target, right? So if I want to, let's say that you're holding a picture behind your back or in a different room, right, and you ask me to use my psychic abilities to sense it. I would hold the intention to just see what that picture is, right? And so that would be a sense intention, and every intention has a subject. So the command is to see, and the subject is the thing in the next room that you told me about, right? So in that case, parapsychology would call that subject a target, right? So for going forward, I'm just going to say the term target to talk about the subject of sense intentions, which is basically just the thing you want to use your psychic abilities to see. So now I'm going to go over, in the psychic community, right, they have a special kind of formalism or nomenclature to talk about sense intentions in a more specific way. So just to go over this first, it says clear type refers to a special nomenclature used to describe sense intentions more particularly than a general term ESP. So like I said, ESP means extrasensory perception, right? So extrasensory perception is just a really general umbrella term to talk about sensing things voluntarily through your spirit. Well, I don't know that it always refers to the voluntary form of sensing. I suppose it could also refer to the involuntary form, but normally it's referring to the voluntary form of sensing, right, which is sensing things by choice. So ESP just refers to that in a very general way. So I can pick up information about what a target looks like, what it sounds like, what it tastes like using ESP. However, if you want to be more particular, right, you can get more specific than that. So for example, let's say I want to only pick up information about what a target looks like. So I'm using my ESP to see what the target looks like. I could just say I'm using ESP. That would still be true, but it's not specific enough. ESP can refer to all types of different information. They refer to picking up information about a target that's different from seeing it or seeing what it looks like. So there's all different types of information that the target has that is not just, that's outside the scope of just what it looks like. But so if I use the term ESP, that wouldn't specify the information I'm trying to get from the target. So in the psychic community has specific terms that is more specific to a type of information you're retrieving from the target. So the most popular one, the one you've heard about, is called clairvoyance. So what is clairvoyance? Clairvoyance actually means clear seeing, right? And what it means is when you're using the sense intention related to seeing something. So if I hold the intention, if my intention expresses a command to see a particular target, my subconscious will charge in a way that allows me to see the target, regardless of where in the universe it is. And what that means is I'm going to be able to pick up visual information about the target. So that's what clairvoyance is. Now so that's actually one of the clairtypes, right? So they're called clairtypes. Another clairtype is clairaudience. So that one would allow me to pick up audible information about the target or what the target sounds like. So let's say I want to hear someone speaking and I want to hear what they sound like for whatever reason. Again, it doesn't matter where in the universe they are. If I hold the intention to hear, and that's related to this person, let's say there's somehow I know about them, right? If I hold the intention to focus on them, and again, I should mention that your spirit has the ability to really focus on anything and just pick up information about it. So if the moment someone tells you about it, then you have the ability to focus on them, and your spirit has the ability to lock into them. That's the ability of the third eye and the spirit's ability to sense things. So let's say somehow I know that this person across the universe exists. All I have to do is focus on the intention to hear them, and my subconscious, well, we'll talk about how the subconscious charges, but if I focus on that, then I would be using clairaudience, right? As I use my psychic abilities, I would be able to use my psychic abilities to hear what they sound like. And I wouldn't be really focusing on what they look like in that particular case. So in that case, I would be using clairaudience. So I would use the sense intention related to hearing as opposed to seeing, as was the case with clairvoyance, right? So that's basically the clair types. I go over other ones in the book. It's not super important. The other one that kind of is a little bit important is clairrecognizance. So clairrecognizance, that one I feel like is a true sixth sense, right? So the reason I say that, even though these are all part of your sixth sense, the reason I say that one is a true sixth sense is because that one is related to your spirit's ability to sense abstract information about a target, right? So it's not information that would fall into one of your five senses. So, for example, clairvoyance is related to seeing the target or picking up visual information about the target, which that's just similar to your sense of sight, right? Clairaudience is about picking up audible information about the target, which is just related to your sense of hearing. However, clairrecognizance allows you to sense information, abstract information about the target. It could be like its age. Let's say it's a person. You could pick up information about the person's age, what their likes and dislikes are, right? I don't know, their name, something like that. Some aspect of their history, right? So this is all theoretical, but in theory you can do all of those things, right? So that's information that wouldn't fall in terms of the five senses, so it's abstract. So that's why I say it's a true sixth sense, right? But claircognizance, whenever I've done any type of use psychic abilities at all, or ESP for anything, I actually started with clairvoyance a little bit, then I started doing clairaudience, which is actually a little bit easier, and then I went back to clairvoyance. Because I was basically practicing all different kinds, and I kind of wanted to challenge myself to do this. I kept thinking that I could do both of them very easily, right? That's when I was practicing it. I didn't know that your subconscious charges, right? I didn't know that these abilities had to charge. I noticed whenever I would get better at clairaudience, I'm like, okay, now I want to know how to do clairvoyance. I find I would lose this now, and I never knew why. But of course, it has to do with charging. Once I charge for this, then this discharges. When I charge for this discharges, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I did these two. I've also done clear. I forgot what the one for clear touch is called. I put that in the book. Clear touch is actually a little weird because that one, in theory, if it's being true to form, right? The clear, what is it? Clear tangents? I think it's clear tangents. Excuse me. That one is also known as psychometry. That should mean picking up information, tactile information about the target. So picking up information about the texture of the target. But no, for whatever reason, that one doesn't follow the rules the rest of them follows. That one just means picking up any type of information, whether it be abstract or concrete, picking up information psychically about the target just from touching it, right? So I don't know why that one's different, but the other ones follow that standard form related to sense intentions. But yeah, I have done that one before as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think, yeah, we covered everything. So yeah, that's basically just a clair type. So not super important, but I just wanted to cover that because I find that nomenclature interesting. So I found utility in it also when I was sort of formulating this whole theory. One thing I will say, though, is that for the rest of the chapter, we're going to really talk about psychic abilities in terms of the sense intention related to sight. So picking up visual information about the target. Now, everything we discuss can apply to any one of these sense intentions, whether you're talking about hearing the target, smelling it, seeing what it tastes like, or texture, whatever. It's all the same, right? But we're just going to pick clairvoyance, or we're going to pick the sense intention related to seeing something for everything we discuss in terms of how to use psychic abilities. So basically, we're going to be talking mainly about how to use clairvoyance. So yeah, that's pretty much it. In the next video, I forget what actually the order I put in the book. I think we're going to talk about psychic energy. So just as we talked about spiritual energy, there's actually also something called psychic energy, which is there's usefulness or utility in discussing that. And I think we're going to combine it. We're also going to talk about what I call an awakened state or an awakened spiritual state and what happens when you build up a lot of psychic energy. All right, so I was actually going to end the video, but there was actually something else I forgot to mention. Two things I forgot to mention. So one is that this isn't super important, but important enough to sort of make sense of what I talk about later. So one is that I should have said when, I pretty much alluded to it, but when you're sensing things involuntarily, even if it's in the spirit realm, so your spirit's third eye is turned on, you can sense things in the spirit realm. I should have mentioned that when you sense things that way, you're seeing it or you're sensing it, whether it be seeing, hearing, or smelling, or whatever, you're sensing it in the local space around you. So like I said, I probably alluded to that, but I want to make that clear. When you're voluntarily sensing something, generally it's like in your mind or in your imagination. That's kind of what I meant before by saying it kind of borrows from your creativity. If I sense something at a distance, let's say it's across the planet, and I use my spirit's ability to sense it or pick up information about it, it would just be like mostly my imagination. I wouldn't be seeing it like in the local space around me. So I just wanted to make that clear. When you sense things in the spirit realm, because your physical body is when you sense things involuntarily in the local space around you through your spirit, now your body's also sensing things in your spirit in that same involuntary way, so they pretty much just overlap with each other. So that's when people have their psychic abilities turned on in the involuntary sense, they see physical things with their physical eyes, but they also see spiritual things in the same space, right, with their spirit's eyes. So they just see it like over there, you know what I mean, in the local space around them. So I wanted to make that clear. I felt like I should make that distinction. The other thing I wanted to mention is something I actually believe God wanted me to put in this video, or at least talk to you guys about in one of these videos, is I got a message to look up the testimony of this woman. I don't know her full name. It's Melissa. So I believe she has a YouTube channel called Melissa Full of Grace. I watched her testimony on a YouTube channel called Stephen Conidaris. If I'm saying that name right. So she was basically involved in witchcraft and using psychic abilities and stuff like that to communicate with spirit guides. So pretty much everything I told you guys about. I told you guys pretty much about how the whole thing works with psychic possession, with the long con, with demonic entities, and things like that. So she went through all of it. And eventually she gave her life to Jesus and things like that. And so yeah, God just wanted me, I got a message from God to just tell you guys to sort of watch that testimony. And that pretty much puts a lot of what I'm saying into, you see a lot of what I said about how that works. Right? And again, that's just another kind of warning because of all the things she went through you don't do this stuff unless God has given you permission, right? You do not do it outside of that, right? And we talked about how when you use psychic abilities outside of God's permission, it's sinful, of course. Your spiritual energy drops, and as you charge your subconscious use psychic abilities more and more, right? Negative entity latches onto you, and then they're basically going to start psychically possessing you and controlling what you psychically sense, things like that. So, not good, obviously. There actually was another testimony. This one just kind of popped up, which I thought was interesting to mention here. So this one is by a lady named Carol Juniel, if I'm saying that right. So I'm watching this on a YouTube channel called Deep Believer. So for that one, she had the ability to see in the spirit realm based on God's influence, and the influence, it looks like through the influence of the Holy Spirit. She doesn't necessarily mention psychic abilities, but I think that's a good example of how I believe God could sort of turn on your psychic abilities as is needed, right? She's not doing it on her own and doing whatever she wants to with it, right? You only use these abilities with God's direction, only, right? That's the only time it's okay. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I forgot to include that before. Like I said, I believe God wanted me to just mention that video. Might have been both of the videos, but the message I got was one of my dreams, specifically for that video, the first one I mentioned, for Melissa. We haven't talked about too much about how communication in dreams works yet. That is actually one of the main ways you receive messages from. It can be God, but also angels, your higher self, things like that. We're gonna talk about that later. But yeah, just wanted to mention that though. But again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.